Okay, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Wes Rades. I'm Bay Nature's Executive Director, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you tonight to the beautiful David Brower Center for tonight's live Bay Nature Talk, featuring photographer Stefan Thuilot, and his California Forest Project. Together, we are a community that cares deeply and is deeply curious about nature and the environment here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So every time that we have this opportunity to get together as a group, it's a real highlight. For 24 years now, Bay Nature has been nourishing this community through its pages, highlighting local habitats and ecosystems, wildlife and plant life, and new places for all of us to discover together. We hold events like this for three primary reasons. The first is to bring the stories from our pages to life. The second is to connect you directly with experts in the field, like Stefan this evening. And the third is to remind us of all of this, that in fact we are a community with shared interests and concerns and values. So I hope as you're with us tonight that you'll take a moment to get to know your neighbor, have a conversation out in the gallery as you're looking at the photographs, and learn a little bit about how we're each contributing here in the area. If you have a great time tonight, if you feel like you found your people, we'd like to invite you to become Bay Nature members. Membership carries many benefits. For $40 a year, you're invited to each of our events like this, which occur both in person and online. You receive invitations to our naturalist-led hikes across the area. And of course, you receive 4 quarterly issues of Bay Nature magazine. If you're interested in that, we'll certainly follow up with you after the event and hope that you'll join us and become part of our community. Tonight's event, the genesis, was an online story that we published back in May of this year about this crazy project of a photographer seeking to photograph all of California's forests and going from corner to corner in the state to carry out his vision. The project raises awareness about California's unique forest biodiversity through large-scale, high-resolution photography. As you've wandered the galleries, I think you'll agree that the photographs are quite affecting. After a brief presentation tonight, we're also going to have a panel moderated by Bay Nature's Editor-in-Chief, Victoria Schlesinger, which will also provide you with the opportunity to have your questions answered as well. I remember when I first met Stefan, it was at his staging gallery just off 4th Street here in Berkeley, as he was generating this exhibition and conceptualizing how it would lay out. And so it's a real pleasure to be here with him tonight, celebrating the close of what's been a successful exhibition here at the Brower Center. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming up for his presentation, photographer Stefan Thuilot. Thanks everyone for being here.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I must say that Bay Nature should be a role model for a magazine, a publication, organizations to educate us about the environment where we live. And I thank everyone for being here. I know we have a little competing event in Chicago. I'm really pleased to see you all. I would also like to thank the Brower Center. It's a really fabulous organization to host environmental cause projects like mine. I couldn't be more pleased, and Maria and everyone, thank you so much. Let me also thank my nephew, who was relentlessly working on this project with me for post-processing the work. I think that's probably enough for now. No, Joe McBride, my mentor. And Joe will be part of the panel. Looking forward to that. Thank you for all your help. This is the first year, really, that this project became public. I worked entirely in a vacuum for the longest time, for some 7-8 years. I've taken about 700-800 of these scenes. It's a lot of work. It was a lot of hardship, but I also really, really, truly learned a lot. But before I go to any specifics, this tree was taken in Prairie Creek. I would like to ask the audience, how many people did see me at the base of the tree? Okay, all right. That's where I am. It adds a little bit of context, right? About this amazing biomass. I mean, here we have some temporary speck of biomass. That tree, it's just so amazing. So I will have the picture pen up just for you to get a sense of all the splendid detail. It's essentially a vertical panoramic. And it's kind of an impossible photo if you think about it. I can maybe speak a little bit more about it later. By the way, we will reach the canopy before I end my talk. So it's an absolute blessing. I actually photographed it 3 times. I was never entirely satisfied until I really reached this result. Wow, it takes a time. What's so amazing about these redwoods is really the canopy. And I don't know if anyone has seen the upstairs exhibit. If you didn't, you should go back up because I have a detailed shot of this canopy here, which is just so epic. It's kind of a testament of strength and endurance. This, by the way, is not, I have to get the name right, Julia Butterfly Hill. Do people know her? Yeah. Okay. I superimposed someone in there just to give you a sense of the enormous size of this canopy. So I would like to, since this is a recorded talk, I would like to read out and have some text here. I know it's not the norm for a PowerPoint presentation to read out stuff, but I will do it anyways. California Forest Project serves several purposes. It is at the intersection of art and sciences. The photos cultivate dynamic approach to nature photography that provides complex ecological storytelling, making them accessible to a broad audience. That's my hope. Construct an extensive photographic database that will be accessible to researchers, preservationists, forming a foundation for others to build upon. Provide photographic tools for forest preservation organizations and scientists to convey compelling narratives. Improve methods of capturing, recording ecological changes through medium of repeat fixed point photography. That is something that hopefully Joe will also speak a little about. Develop an innovative photographic framework and approach for capturing expensive forest landscapes. And then lastly, photographically document the most iconic heritage forests at risk, creating enduring records for benefits for future generations. So what sets these photos apart is really the fact that they are very large. It's essentially an image of the entire forest as it stands in front of you. And technology was not able to achieve this previously so well. I think we are at a lucky age to be able to do this. These photos are composed of up to the redwood, believe it or not, 250 photos with a 100 megapixel camera. So it's a document of enormous detail. The yellow box represents a photo taken with your phone's camera, just for context. To represent scale, I included my son here. And since I can't get enough of my son, I added him twice. By using multi-row panoramics, I was able to have my son move from one exposure to the other, just to give you a sense how broad these images are. This is a scene of fantastic Manzanita environment at Henry Cove. True Bay nature, Wes, right? Very close to here. I would like to zoom in just to tell you again how detailed these photos are. And also, I mean, the awe of the complexity of forest. I mean, there isn't visually, in my opinion, anything more complex than a forest. So this is the zoomed in photo, which represents that little area there. I must say, it's an interesting experience to photograph forest. It's, you know the term bushwhacking. I don't whack anything down, but it's just amazingly physical. But it's also amazing to go really, really deep off trail. And California is just so full of amazing forests. We have really one of the greatest forests in the world, the greatest variety of certain species. It's just so precious. So yeah, these tripods are doing some forest yoga here. I usually mirror that when I stand next to it. So a little video here that just gives you a sense of how dense certain forests are, and that is not necessarily good. And we will speak about that later. Very disorienting. I mean, these are pretty dark woods. This will come to an end, and it should, because after it ended, you don't want to hear my German swearing. You know, what's really remarkable is that since I started this project, that was 2016, so much changed, just the news. And it's overwhelming. And I witnessed these changes. And luckily, I was also able to document them. One powerful way to do it is through repeat photography. This is one of the more exciting aspects about this project for me. It's kind of time traveling visually. So what you see on the left is Redwood Creek in Kings Canyon, Sequoia Grove. And to the right, you see the same scene, same light. I really tried to photograph in the same light conditions, the exact same place, to be able to compare forest. It becomes somewhat of a typology. It's really amazing to observe that some of these trees burned to death, but then a little spindly tree survives. Very strange. This is a forest near the Bay Area. It's Stevenson Park. To me, forests are a stage, and it relates back a little bit to old masters' paintings, what I'm trying to achieve, where you incorporate everything. And because it's such a broad view. And this forest here is, for example, a forest that is in transition. All these 10 oaks are dying because of sudden oak deaths. And it's a forest in transition. And this repeat photography, which started in the 70s, but then it didn't really pick up, really allows us to look at all these changes. So here you see another trunk of a 10 oak splitting another trunk that fell before in half. There's always a lot of drama in forest. And now we see these Douglas firs come in, and it's a transition, right? That is not necessarily good because it's more fire prone. Another example of repeat photography, luckily one where the fire is not quite as devastating and needed. I mean, let's not think that all fires are really bad here in California. So here we have the scene after the fire. You can see that all the foliage burned. Some trees didn't survive, including ghost pines. And luckily, some of the fir trees that may not even belong there in first place. Moving to another slide, you see the resilience of this forest. It's actually doing okay. The oak trees are alive, the fir trees are dead, the buckeyes will come back. Again, that scene you saw before as a static photo. I actually went back and looked at some aerial footage yesterday, and you will see the location of this. And luckily, the trees you saw there are surviving. This photo I took there for the reason this is an enormously dense stand of sequoias. I don't think there are many stands like this anywhere. Sadly, it burned. If you look closely, you see me there standing. I visited this forest after it burned. There was a whole winter in between. And I was not prepared for this. It was really, truly one of the saddest moments of my life. These trees are essentially all dead. Why is that? So these are the preconditions. These are the fire marks as we know them for natural fires. We absolutely need here in California. They rise, maybe 20 feet up, sometimes less. This is not normal. This is fire suppression. We have a lot of young fir trees that are dead that surround these trees. And alongside on what is on the ground, create a few load of major fires. These smaller trees act as fire ladders to these 1,000 to 2,000-year-old sequoias, which resulted into this absolutely epic, devastating fire, where now the fire marks are up to the crown. Here we have another scene. You see actually that tree is laying down. It had a root burn. I will go back. There's just a lot of debris here, right? Without the debris, we now get erosion problems, and it's a really bad spiral of events. If prescribed burning of these dead vegetations beneath these giants were given prior, we wouldn't have seen the death of these sequoias. This photo represents the epicenter of, in my opinion, all California fires, in where the sequoias that are perhaps 200 feet tall died all off because the fire reached the crown, almost the crowns. Nothing is alive. To give you some context, I put this map together last night, and that little circle represents where I took the photos, right? The ones you saw first, not the last one. Tiny area in this forest. It looks good. It looks like there was no fire, but there was one, and we saw die off. This is the area I photographed last. This represents essentially the area that saw the greatest amount of deaths. Epic amount of sequoias that died here. We had actually a fifth panelist here invited, and she is a fire scientist. She works out in the field. She can't attend because she had to tend this fire, which is now about 20 miles from that area I just showed you. It's called the Coffee Pot Fire. Funny name here, but I think this is a good opportunity maybe to applaud the first responders, the firefighters, the fire scientists that really literally risked their health and life. I mean, as I mentioned, not all fires are devastating to forest, and fire is part of the cycle of forest. This is the same forest that occurred with a natural fire, the death of this particular tree. It was probably at the end of its lifespan. You see that this forest is a little bit better maintained, and it's I'm sure the panelists can talk a little bit about how to prevent fires in these incredible heritage forests. I was looking at, I photographed, as Wes said, every corner of California, but I have special areas I really like, and one is Calaveras. I hope most of you or some of you have seen Calaveras. There's the North Grove, there's the South Grove. This is the North Grove. I must say, going there in fall is a surrealistic experience. I tried very hard to accurately depict these fall colors. They are just like no other colors, these dogwoods. But here you see a relatively well-managed forest. However, the South Grove is a completely different story. In the South Grove, we have no management or very little. There are no trails. And you see, it may look really romantic and beautiful, but the fact is this is an unnatural condition for the habitat of sequoia trees. There, at times, you're standing in front of a 25-foot trunk and you only see it after you get 30 feet close to it. That is not normal. This is actually also in the South Grove. It looks really pretty and well managed. The reality here too is it isn't. This is one of the prints you saw in the exhibit. Repeat photography can also photograph changes throughout the seasons. This photo here is in the South Grove, and it was the first attempt to manage the fuel load, to eliminate all that dead stuff that surrounds these sequoia trunks. This is a really big tree, and I think this effort alone will save this tree. And the South Grove sees now the largest controlled burning of California history for sequoias. Epic undertaking, really exciting. The Russian wilderness above Trinity is an amazing environment because it's at the intersection of a lot of climates and soil conditions, and it includes the largest variety of conifers in 1 square mile anywhere on Earth. It's an area that doesn't get much attention necessarily for fire management. I really feel it should, because it's a world heritage, in my mind, ecologically. And so this photo it looks like just a photo, right? But what's so amazing about this photo is you see about 15, 20 trees. But there are 8 to 7 different conifers in this one photo. And I think there may only be a handful of places on Earth where you get that much variety of conifers. I'm very, very proud of this photo. It almost killed me to get there. It's a really beautiful area.
The incredible Brewer spruce to the right is endemic to these mountains. And, well, it can only be found in this region. They're so amazing. A lot of variety of conifers.
Really large species. The problem about my photography is it's hard to gauge how big these trees is unless I put myself into the photos, which I hate to do. But I mean, these are probably 6 foot, 7 foot diameter trees. Very pristine environment. And decay is part of the cycle. So, I mean, this may have been a beetle-infested tree. Another area I really focus on is Jedediah Redwood National Park. You saw this photo. I mean, just to give you some context about the enormity of that grove, there I am It's amazing. Many of you are probably gardeners, right? And these understories are like gardens, but way better than we could ever design them. So I'm speeding up a little here. Henry Coe, well, Bay Nature covers this area. The manzanitas are really champion manzanitas there. I can't get enough of them. But it has also a large variety of oak trees. I think there are 6 species or 7 species alone in that area. And it's a representation of that whole perimeter of the Central Valley. Seasonal change. My favorite time to travel is, I'm probably the only German on earth that likes to travel when there is bad weather. It's the winter. I do like the arid landscape here in California. More oaks. Controlled fire, prescribed fire to save these ponderosa pines. It's one of the more western reaches of them. So much effort is taken into saving these, and it's so great. We really, really, truly need more of this. So this is just a scene we see in this region, right? Riparian corridor. I'm showing this because what interests me in forest photography is really how branches, trunks articulate. It's almost like a dance. I create drawings that show really the structure, I call them X-rays, of these forms. And it's a never-ending inspiration for me as an artist. Have you ever wondered why the lichen stops where it does in this case here?
Yes.
Snow.
Yeah, correct. It shows really where the average snow load is. What is a great side effect for me to spend so much time in the forest is to observe without having to necessarily read books about ecology. It takes a long time to come to conclusions, but this slow learning is deep learning, especially if you then combine it to books. Don't get me wrong, I read. We can't talk about California fire without talking about pine bark beetles. Devastating scene. We see more and more of this. I hope in the panel discussion we can touch on that. What often happens in these forests is that, the beetle infestation really creates more dry wood, and then we experience these enormously devastating fires that really the only living thing left are the cones. Just as a little anecdote, I visited this area probably 3-4 weeks after the fire. You see those little whitish yellow fields. As a novice of wildfire I just walked through and ended up almost to my shoulder in a white powdery hole of the ashes. I almost disappeared in there. But what I want to really emphasize here is that, this is all gloom and doom to look at these photos, right? But there is also hope, and part of the hope are seeds, cones, and you see how they popped open here. I believe if the forest regenerates with these cones and we get more than 7 years, there will be new cones that in case another fire moves through, we will have a new forest. If that doesn't happen, then this forest might as well become chaparral. I want to sidetrack just for 30 seconds.
Because of the work on California forests, I also became interested in high elevation solitary trees in the Sierras. And I started a new project. And I'm looking really at the survival of these species that grow up to 2,000 years old. It's really a fascinating topic.
And speaking of topics, we have some artists here in the audience that are very interested in forest and art. We have Crystal, we have Jennifer. Rainy, unfortunately, can't be here. I think forest really, truly provides amazing inspiration for artists. That drawing in the center I created, it feels that once you understand forest and you try to recreate it, anything goes, anything works really, how you articulate it. It's kind of a miracle. And I want to conclude my talk here with a story in Henry Coe. My brother died unexpectedly, and I came back from the funeral in Germany. And forest is just really a healing environment, right? You know, I don't necessarily believe if I die, I float around and become a deer, right? But this is not a coincidence. I went into the forest, met this deer, which followed me for about 20 minutes. I couldn't believe it. It was in a very remote area where deer is not used to people at all. It brought me to this amazing scene. You know, these are the moments I long for, to go into the forest. And I think forest is really a sanctuary for grievance, fun, joy, to come back to ourselves in this crazy world. And I think it's so important to preserve this. And there is so much at stake. Thank you. And I would like to bring Victoria Schlesinger to the podium.
Hi, I'm Victoria Schlesinger. I'm the editor of Bay Nature magazine and website. I want to just begin by saying, wow, Stefan, that is an extraordinary project you have undertaken. So another round of applause. Let's see. Bay Nature came to Stefan's photos, as Wes said, a while back, and then Bay Nature's own Kate Golden, our digital editor, wrote a story about Stefan's work, and we published it just before the show here began in May, so it feels very timely that we have the opportunity to be here at the close, and really thank you for including us and giving us a chance to be part of this. So without further ado, let me welcome our panelists to the stage. Stefan, come on up. And let's see. Why don't the four of you go ahead and come on up, and then I'll introduce you. Okay, I have a particular order in which I'm going to do this. So here we have Adina Merenlender, who is an internationally recognized conservation biologist who has authored more than 100 published works. She is currently working as the Cooperative Extension Specialist at the Environmental Science Policy and Managed Department at UC Berkeley. She's also co-author of 2 books for anyone who is not in the academic space. 2 books that are really like the handbooks of the UC Berkeley naturalist program. So you may have come across her work that way. Let's see. Obi Kaufmann, right here at the end, who is a naturalist, an author, an illustrator, an artist. He has 5 books to his name already. A 6th is coming due any day about ecology in California. There's the trilogy at least. And last and certainly not least, we have Joe McBride with us, who is a professor emeritus of landscape architecture and environmental planning at UC Berkeley. He's done a great deal of work in urban forestry and planning throughout the Bay Area, certainly in our local national parks. So you have been touched by his work, whether you realize it or not. And it is my understanding that, Stefan, you attended some of Joe's classes, correct? You might have to turn it on. Yeah. Go ahead and grab your mics and turn them on.
Yes, that's correct. It awakened my interest even further into forests because Joe is very passionate about the teachings of the ecologies, the implications, and it set actually seed to this project indirectly because I really wanted to see if we can represent very well California forests with photography. And I'm very blessed that that Joe was my teacher and mentor.
And I want to say my understanding is that it was in one of his classes that Joe said something to the effect of, there just aren't, serial collections of forest photography in California. And out of a comment like that, here we are today. And I think it's of value to note that something as simple as being in a classroom and stating a need, or being in an auditorium, stating a need, who knows what we'll learn today, or ideas we'll stumble upon, but those can really be the genesis of a project as extraordinary as this. So what I want to do first is get a little read on who we all are here. So Stefan already touched briefly on some of the changes and challenges that California forests are experiencing: catastrophic fire, drought, insect infestation. What else am I forgetting? So can you raise your hand if you kind of already generally have a sense that those are the processes really affecting our forests? Okay, great. And then keep your hands up if you are, in fact, doing research, studying, volunteering, working in these spaces. Okay, great. Just gives us a sense of where we're talking tonight. So with that, Joe and Adina, could you both speak, not at great length, but get us oriented to the challenges of California forests today, some of the challenges that they are facing and the changes that they're facing?
Well, as was well illustrated by Stefan's photographs, we're facing a very serious problem with fire. And this problem is the result in part of the way the forests have been managed for the last 100 years that has allowed increased density and increased fuel mass accumulations, and also this unfortunate climate change that is resulting in warmer summers and drier years in certain parts of the state. So I think that's the primary problem that we're facing in forests.
Well, first, of course, I agree with Joe. That's the easy one. I also will bring in some threats that I don't think we've talked about yet. We are still converting a lot of our especially magical oak woodlands, very, very biodiverse systems, into other land uses. Those oak woodlands do not have sufficient protections. We're also challenging our forests with some pretty intensive management of them in working landscapes. So I don't think we've quite figured out working landscapes for conservation entirely yet. And then we've got all those other existential threats.
So from there, given we have a really special combination of people here who are all bridging art and science, design, I'd really love to hear from Joe and Adina first. Could you talk about how, when you look at Stefan's photos or you read Obi's books or see his illustrations, what do you see as scientists? Where are the tools there for your work?
It's a great foundation for repeat photography, which is a branch of ecology that uses a photography that has been repeated at the same locations to see changes in the forest in this case. And I think Stefan has created a wonderful foundation of photographs that future ecologists will be able to depend on to get a sense of how these forests have changed, either with or without fire. The dramatic images of the giant sequoia trees that have been burned are just absolutely stunning. And we have nothing like this that has previously been done. There are a number of repeat photography studies that have been done in California, but they've taken more of a landscape view, looking at, say, Yosemite Valley from the peaks around the valley. And they do demonstrate a significant change in vegetation. But the details that we see in Stefan's photograph will give us another dimension, so to speak, to compare how these forests have changed over time. And in a particular set of his photographs, we have an opportunity to see how the forests will recover, or how they do recover, I should say, over time.
True, great value there. First of all, just awe-inspiring. So thank you so much. Incredible work. For me, it's a window through observation. I can see how well you've observed the system. And that's the same for Obi's work, where I just know that they're both observing nature. And that is something I think we're losing. And I think that's something why motivates the naturalist program and motivates all of us as naturalists. All too often we jump to threats, questions, solutions to problems. We've got our sort of thinker brain going, and we forget to start with observation. And then from that emerges the more meaningful questions, right? The more likely to be successful solutions. So I really appreciate the work that we've seen by photography artists, things like that, because it helps us to observe nature.
Well, and Joe, so when you look at this photo behind us, which we've had an opportunity to look at a bit, what do you see? What are you looking for?
Well, why don't you start first?
I can't say that I have like a predetermined idea of what
I'm
looking for. I guess, are you thinking about more around forest health? Is that where you're sort of going?
Exactly. And just, if it's overgrown, what species are there? How tall are they? How can you tell if they're thriving or not?
I love this appreciation that Stefan shared about the understory and how we couldn't create that garden ourselves. And so while I think there's a lot of attention to the sort of megaflora, I think I tend to think a little bit more about the little things, the understory, the lichens, how diverse is the understory, what's the light like, how is that defining the community? And yes, sometimes those things reveal things about the diversity or health of that system.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the variation that I'm familiar with in redwood and giant sequoia forests in terms of the distribution of plants. And I have so much appreciation for Stefan's photographs because he captured that detail and it so exceeds Ansel Adams' photographies of the redwood forest in a scientific detail sense. I mean, Ansel Adams' photography is amazing, but he really works with light and shadow to maybe emphasize the structural characteristics of the forest. But you can't see in many of his photographs what you can see in all of Stefan's that will allow a future ecologist to see if these are rephotographed, how the changes have taken place.
So, Stefan, then, can you talk a little bit about, and maybe this is part of your relationship with Joe, but really, how did you decide what to photograph? So you're tromping all the way out there. There's a million different frames you could choose.
I very much like this question. It's, in the beginning, I don't think any of us are novices if it comes to forest because that's where we originated from. It's in our DNA. But in the beginning, I looked at easily accessible, not physically, but visually easily accessible photos, and it's a bit of a danger because we become editors to simplify something. What I then quickly realized is that the complexity, different sense of aesthetic, that is actually very chaotic, gives me so much more. And so just to give you a hint, Jedediah, absolutely amazing forest, right? If I go there, and I went there 5, 6, 7 times, if I get away with 2 good photos per trip, I will be happy. I don't want to go in a lengthy explanation why it's so difficult to photograph these forests. I mean, it's just, when it's right or wrong. But I don't want to superimpose, this old idea of romanticism. I think there is actually another idea of romanticism I'm interested in. So I don't know if this answers your question.
Definitely. So how many photos are you taking on a given shoot?
So I would say if I'm really lucky, if I travel for 4 days, if I have 70 scenes photographed, that would be epic. I would say on average 6, 7 scenes. And of those, maybe 1 is usable.
Wow.
It takes about 1 hour, 2 hours
to take any one of these images. That's incredible. Obi, can you talk about, since your work spans writing and illustration and watercolor and art, how is the work of scientists, how do you engage with it in the richest way? I mean, you can read papers, you can go out with them, you can interview them, you can, lots of different platforms. And what has been the most engaging for you?
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me tonight, Stefan. This is so good to share the stage with you too. Adina and I are fast friends for a long time now. And Victoria, you and I go way back too. I'm such a fan of Bay Nature and all that you've done there over the past 8 years or so, your 10 years. Yeah, absolutely. But hey, my original proficiency was in mathematics. My father was an astrophysicist and Dr. Kaufmann's son was going to be a mathematician. And yet the epistemic, let's call it the epistemic paradigm I built for myself, over the decades has been one of beauty as another inroad to, shall we say, the language of reality. My father said that mathematics is the language of reality, and he was not wrong. And yet, where does mathematics sit in relationship to both art and science? It is akin to both, and none of either. You know, when I see this, I don't see plant distribution. I see a field of intelligence, really. You know, what we've got here is we've got two stories. We've got a very young story of a very old story too. I think it's very important to remember that there's very much a living indigenous critique that needs to be addressed when we're talking about forest health and vitality across the California floristic province. And that is that really the modern configuration of arboreal habitats throughout the state is about as old as the ancient pyramids. And that has to do with the stabilization of climate in the mid-Holocene and the advent of hundreds of tribes, mature tribes that existed in these pyrodiverse economies. You have to remember that there were and are as many tribes more tribes in California than the rest of the North American continent. Well, north of Mexico, and that has to do with a very specific relationship to what fire is, and that relationship is deep traditional ecological knowledge. I guess this is response to the manner in which the redwood tree, for example, which, you know, is a genetic history that goes back about 300 million years, you know, to the earliest conifers. The redwood tree has a whole toolbox, a litany of being able to deal with fire. You're going to live for 2,000 years, and it's very hard to kill a redwood. That's why there's you know, the redwoods are still pretty much extant throughout their entire original distribution area since that guy found that pretty rock in that river near our state's capital 170 years ago. You know, so like it's a completely different quality of forest, we know, but the architecture is still there and recoverable. So I guess my point is that there's two stories: a very, very new story, this sort of like divorce of fire ecology from forestry, say, over the past few decades and in your academic circles, and then the very, very old story that is being remembered from a resurgent indigenous critique that gets us wondering, oh yeah, the forests are infirmed, overcrowded, drought stressed, climate stressed, all because of decisions that people make or that people don't make, which has been the case as well. So this is all anthropogenic in nature, and knowing that, then we begin to imagine like a greater lexicon, really, a vocabulary to describe this thing, this intelligence, this non-human intelligence, this system. I mean, when you were talking about the deer in your brother's spirit or whatever, and I'll end my diatribe here in a second, but like when I look at that and I you know, you hold up that good black dirt and then, you know, the soil in a forest, and you realize that there are inside that handful of dirt more microbes exist than humans who have ever existed and probably ever will exist. In that one handful of dirt, what we're talking about is a cybernetic system of such massive complexity that it can never be fully apprehended, but is still communicable, still actionable. And yet, apprehending that sort of immense being is the closest thing that I've ever had to like a spiritual experience, because I really don't know what spiritual experience is. I never grew up with any kind of religious tradition or anything, but the beauty, the internalization, the digestion of that becomes a new frontier of intrinsic value that I think is worthy of exploration here in this Anthropocene.
Thinking about complexity here and what you're talking about, how does science capture this complexity versus how art is capturing this complexity? I mean, they really, I won't offer my take, but yeah, please. Joe, take it away.
Like your father, we're somewhat more quantitative. Excuse me. Are we working here? All right. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. I was saying that, scientists in the field of ecology are very concerned about the quantification of nature, if you will. And so we would look at this photograph behind me and think about how we were going to lay out the plots to determine the density of the different species. And that would give us a quantitative description of this particular location, which is, I think, very much in contrast to the what we see in the photograph in a way. I mean, we may recognize the species that are there, but in looking at this, I don't immediately start counting the number of fern plants.
Well, I'm so glad that Obi brought up the amazing diversity of indigenous peoples in California. And I just want to say, and you've obviously asked sort of, I think, of Western science, kind of how do you quantify this kind of thing? And I just want to say, I think Western science is finally catching up. Well, not even catching up, beginning to unlearn and start to catch up with indigenous ontologies on this. And the way that we need to think about using fire in a good way is just one example of that, right? And the leadership is here now for with indigenous peoples here in California. I want to say, okay, so if we're trying to think about how we use fire in a good way with Native culture bearers as leaders, then the Land Back movement is probably the most hopeful movement of our day. Not only, of course, for forest health, for community resilience, but also in the name of justice.
Well, whatever we do, we're going to do it all together. And I think that this field, fire, it's on everybody's mind. It's everywhere. And there was always going to be a reckoning. And I think the scientific community has understood that for decades and decades and decades, that this was coming, and this era of megafires that we've been in the past 20 years since we've extinguished, for example, the 10 a.m. rule, the complete fire suppression across federal lands in California is about 50% of the state. Right. So I believe that the full integration of what you were just suggesting there, Adina, where we figure out fire, we get right with it. And what does that mean by getting right with it? Well, I think it's an economy large enough to transform California. I think we have a lot of landscape architects. That's just one aspect of like rethinking what the wildland urban interface is. John Valent in his new book, Fire Weather, if you haven't read it yet, you got to go read that book. But he says the WUI, which is what fire officials tend to refer to it as, the wildland urban interface, is everywhere. And transforming our relationship with that, what should we call it? That ecotone, that emerging anthropogenic, that human landscape will influence all manner of industry, from healthcare to software design to landscape. I think there's enough it rivals like the water projects of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. It rivals in potential impact on our gross domestic product in this state, the richest state in the union, more than any single factor. And it's all related to energy production and political awareness. I think the consequences and if ecology is anything, it's the study of consequences of this opportunity, this relationship with our arboreal relatives begins to describe something that is radically different. It makes the 20th century policy look quaint, anachronistic, because of the new data. And I need the data. Give me the data. My art requires it. It must be data driven. If I don't get it right, it's my North Star. Get it right. Get the data right, and then you can do whatever you want. I'm counting like feathers.
I definitely have more questions for you guys, but I want to open it up to folks here. Are there questions? Let's start with Stu.
Okay, I'll try to talk loud.
Thank you.
There are two forest types I hope that you tackle. The first one is the grandeur of the pygmy forests in Mendocino, where like 200-year-old trees aren't out that tall. And the other is the, quote, ancient bristlecone pine forests up in the White Mountains, but not the gnarly trees that everyone always associates with it. You get into the good growing conditions, it's a large forest tree. I mean, you get trees, like 6 feet in diameter growing 150 feet tall on good sites. And nobody knows about that aspect of bristlecone pines.
Are you directing that?
I have Stefan.
Got those images.
Your question is if I cover these type of forest. So what is forest, right? It's an interesting question. What are groves? What are singular trees spaced 100 feet apart? In the beginning, I needed a lot of density to get the visual impact, right, of being immersed in a forest. But these type of forests you are mentioning become more and more of an interest to me because they have almost similar ecological value and I may have to just in my mind stretch the idea of forest. But by all means, and I would really like to combine my projects, the one I was promoting a little there with the singular trees and the immigrant wilderness. It's, the spectrum of trees, forest environments is, I have to repeat it, absolutely remarkable in California. I come from Germany. When I grew up near forest, I spent 3-4 hours a day in the forest. I was in awe to see towering 30-foot birch trees. And if I'm lucky, I see birches as well, beeches. And, coming here, holy camole, what is going on here? I was almost beaten to death visually by the trees. Where do we have the John Muir person here? The Muir redwoods. Yeah. When I saw those redwoods, I thought it can't get bigger than this, right? But in the end, to answer your question, the size of the trees doesn't really matter. It's really how do they interact with each other? What story can we tell as a photographer? There is narrative value in any forest. And I think one of the goals of my work is to also bring attention to the common forest, that you see in Tilden. It's not common, it's remarkable.
Other questions? Let's see, the woman in white there. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to try to articulate my somewhat abstract question to Mr. Obi. So you mentioned when you were wrapping up talking about how you want to get the data. And I guess my question is, we were talking about this landscape and this picture in the background and how an ecologist might look at it and think of it as, how do I, transect this and figure out how many different species are here, and how an artist might look at that differently. So my question is, as an artist, how does the data help you with your art? And at what point does that art become less artistic and more just sort of a strict observation? Like you were mentioning, I think at the end, like the number of feathers on a bird. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And that's a great question. Beneath all the silos of these different academic disciplines, or even the great schools of human thought, right? We've got the physical sciences and we got the humanities, right? Like even before that, I'm just human trying to figure this out. That's my North Star, right? And I believe that there's I mean, my hero, one of the greatest, arguably the greatest American naturalist of the 20th century, E.O. Wilson, wrote a book in '89 called Consilience, the Unity of All Knowledge. And you usually hear the word consilience, thrown about in biology departments, connecting, restoration biology to molecular biology or whatever it is. What are the bridges of between academic disciplines? But I think there's something that happens there, and this is what Wilson posits in his book, is that between the humanities and the physical sciences, we get like a margin effect, right? Like an ecotone develops where you have more resources available for understanding at all. I mean, I think that's testament to why you all are here tonight and not, watching the TV in Chicago. Like, this is a very important thing to understand and to come up with this common language, this common vocabulary, this common lexicon about these very complex things. Not just complicated, they're complex. That's two very different concepts, So I see the integration, and I guess my warning then is like, we're all sort of counting on like a techno fix, a techno fix to whatever crises, whatever stress vector, some sort of panacea that will remove I don't know, existential dread from our minds or whatever. But that's not gonna work if it's not tied to the synthesizing a very human story that is a collective, and as we all hopefully agree in this sort of modern context, it has to be a democratic context, so we all have to if we're not like, let's just not argue. Let's tell a better story. Let's figure out what the better story is. And when I look at that, when I see Stefan's like work realized, that's not an argument. That's a story being told, and it's a better story being told. It's a story that decommodifies the forest, right? It's a post-carbon economy that he's suggesting there, and that ignites my imagination.
Thanks. Yes, go ahead.
Stefan, have you thought about photographing roots after fire and devastation? Those redwood roots are kind of come back. They're teeny, though. I know you like to photograph big things.
Yeah, I may provide the impression I like to photograph the grandest trees, but the reality is I'm very interested in any type of forest and how a forest really recovers through its underground root system. It's definitely part of some of my repeat photography, and I'm actually very fascinated by the forest floor. It is as much as I am about the tree trunks, the canopy, the holistic thing of how these trees arranges. To me, every single forest floor tells a different story, and it's easily documented. I don't want to promote necessarily another book here, but one book I would highly recommend as a read is Unseen Forest. Is that the title?
Yeah, The Unseen.
The Unseen Forest, where ecologist, biologist looks at 1 square foot of forest floor, and it's unbelievable. It's its own universe. The tiny little things that are happening are equal to the seemingly bigger things that are happening above. There is no hierarchy in the end. It's all one system. And yeah, you are right. The focus in photography should also be on that.
Stefan, you've said a couple times now that every forest has a story. So what are some of the stories you want your photography to tell?
Wow. Well, I think I want to. So this is a really tough, interesting, and very good question. I think that I want to really enable people to understand forest a little better. Can I do it just with the photos I show? Probably not. I mean, they're like singular photos. Combining it with words, yes. I mean, I think that's where one can tell really deeper stories and add the necessary context really to what the viewer is looking at. My hope is I'm very interested in the interplay between the photo and the actual environment. Let's think about it. Photo of a big forest. Yeah, I mean, we are seeing that big forest. We are seeing that big forest when we are out there. What is the interplay? What are the dynamics? How can both interfere to each other to have us really deepen our understanding and appreciation? And in the end, also for us to really wanting to preserve these environments.
I want to give Adina and perhaps Joe a chance to talk a little bit about ways that, so once we have that appreciation, what do we do with it? And we face this at Bay Nature all the time, this question of like, great, now you've educated me. What do I do with my emotion and motivation now?
My first, I think, a response to that would be, since it's so beautiful, what can we do to perpetuate it as a society? And one of the, issues that is really pressing very hard on us in California with regard to forests is the amount of forest lands that have been burned in the last decade. We've averaged over 700,000 acres of burned land each year for the last 10 years. And since the Forest Service began documenting the loss of land in 1979 up to 2014, we averaged less than half of that in terms of burn for that entire period of time. So there's been this really spike in the loss of these landscapes. And what can we do to prevent this? Stefan showed a picture in the giant sequoia forest where in the national park, they had pulled the fuel away from the base of the big giant sequoia trees. And this is a procedure for protecting those trees that has been known for some time. But as with many of the things we know and many of the things the indigenous people knew, we haven't pulled ourselves together to do the work that needs to be done. Last year, the U.S. Forest Service and CAL FIRE devoted a sum of money to treat 1 million acres in California to reduce the fire risk by the thinning of forests, by the cleaning up of ground fuel, a number of steps that are known to be successful. But, depending on who's counting, we've got about 46 million acres of forest land in California. So, is it going to take us 46 years to really get this work done? And how much of that is going to burn in that period of time? So, my concern is that although the fires get our attention, the work that needs to be done has not got the finances that it needs.
All right, I'll try and keep this brief. I would
Go
say,
on.
Number one, spend time in nature, outside. I just want to say spend time outside observing the community of life. That'll take you everywhere. Number two, I would say engage with others in stewardship. And the type of stewardship you do should be fun for you. So if that is getting
Bravo.
together and figuring out how to build a better clean train that you can commute on or pick up for trash off the beach or join a prescribed burn association or create a rooftop garden or help with food waste, all of those things, do it with others and have fun doing it. It can be very contagious. And the last thing I'll say is a lesson from a friend of mine in the audience now, which is less is more. And that means consume less, and in some ways do less. We are doing and consuming ourselves way beyond planetary boundaries. And so everyone who's trying to reduce that together so the whole community can consume less, that's a really great act of stewardship as well.
And I would really be remiss if I did not say that Bay Nature reports on all of these things, ways you can engage with local stewardship, what's happening with federal money in our forests, is it being spent appropriately or not? We have our new young reporter over here, Tanvi Dutta-Gupta, who is reporting on that as we speak. So Bay Nature is a good resource if you want to know more about this kind of thing. Okay, maybe.
Did I forget to
How are we
say
doing?
become a California naturalist or a UC climate
Oh,
steward?
yes.
It's a little plug.
Yes.
I'm not very good with those things.
Oh, yes, definitely. If you don't know California Naturalist, just Google it and you will be so delighted. Yes. We have reached the 8 o'clock hour, which is when we said that we would wrap this up. And before we do, I want to say the gallery will be open till 9:30. So please take a look at Stefan's photos upstairs in the different rooms throughout the space if you have not. This is such an extraordinary opportunity to see it. I don't know, Stefan, and maybe we could finish with a last comment from you about how will people be able to access your photos going forward?
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I do have a website. I hope everyone here took one of these little postcards. There's a QR code there. I'm still, this project is surviving, and it taught me a lot of patience, by the way, and I'm still patient. I think there will be a book coming up, but I think that's probably not for another 2 years.
With
but
lots of extended fold-outs. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And there will be an Instagram page. I'm so self-conscious about Instagram pages. You look up every night, how many likes, how many followers. It's so weird, But I will definitely seek more exhibits and talks. And if please anyone interested to stay in touch with me, drop an email. I will respond.
Well, with that, thank you all so much for coming. And thank you, all of you, for coming. Please enjoy the rest of the evening, the snacks. Visit Wes at the Bay Nature membership table if you feel like chatting about that. And enjoy the rest of the night. Thank you.